Oh, what magically appeared? So, going for refuge, the true meaning of Buddhism. Welcome to this video course, the fourth in our series on going for refuge, the true meaning of Buddhism. That's our theme, and more precisely, going for refuge to the three jewels, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It's a very important theme to understand how to practice the Buddha's teachings, how to practice Buddhism, to have a healthy and, more importantly, an effective relationship to practice. And more precisely, an underlying attitude of going for refuge needs to be there for our specific practices, for the specific teachings we study. It's the context in which we practice, and it gives a deeper dimension to our practice. It reveals how to go much deeper with our practice. So it's important. So important that Sangharachita, the founder of the Triratna Buddhist Community and Order, Sangharachita said that going for refuge was the central and definitive act of a Buddhist. It's what makes somebody a Buddhist. And it unifies the Buddhist world. We all go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So it's the theme of our fourth course. It's a theme in our introduction to practice, the practice of Buddhism in the Triratna Buddhist Community. I hope you can hear this bell. So this is our fourth course. The courses we've already done. Firstly, an introduction to Buddhist meditation, the visualization of the Tantric stupa. Secondly, Buddhist meditation, going further, going deeper. Thirdly, practice in everyday life, Buddhist ethics. And the last course yet to come, Sangha, the spiritual community, meaning friendship and communication. And my name, of course, is Suvannavira. Suvannavira being my Buddhist name, given to me during a ceremony of ordination, during the ordination ceremony into the Triratna Buddhist Order in 1994. So let's start with looking at going for refuge in the time of the Buddha to help us understand our theme by returning to the source, returning to the historical Buddha, and looking at a traditional formulation for going for refuge found in the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon being the oldest records of the life and teaching of the historical Buddha, written down 300 to 400 years after his parinirvana, written down from the oral tradition which had existed until then. This formulation of going for refuge is often found in a series of verses called the Refuges and Precepts. The Refuges and Precepts can be chanted together as a ritual by Buddhists. This ritual, chanting the Refuges and Precepts together, is spread all over the Buddhist world. It's probably the most well-known Buddhist ritual. So what is the formulation for going for refuge? In Pali, Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Once again, Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. First word, Buddhang. Pali grammar makes it into the dative case, literally, to the Buddha. Then, Saranang, the second word, for refuge, the grammar tells us. And thirdly and lastly, Gacchami, I go, first person singular. So, Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, literally, I go for refuge to the Buddha. But let's have a look at it in a little more detail. So, word by word, Buddhang. Buddhang, literally, to the Buddha. Why go for refuge to the Buddha? Because he's enlightened. And naturally, people often ask, well, what is enlightenment? What does it mean? Perfectly reasonable question, and a question that's hard to answer, because enlightenment is beyond words. We can say enlightenment is the pinnacle of existence. We can say that enlightenment means realizing absolute reality. We could also say that the Buddha was a man who became enlightened man. The Buddha reached a state of consciousness even capable of apprehending absolute reality. The Buddha became enlightened. So the Buddha embodies enlightenment. And we can know the Buddha. We can know enlightenment through knowing the Buddha. We can read about the historical Buddha in the Pali Canon. Learn what he said about himself. One of the many things was that he said he was first in our world to become enlightened, more precisely, first in our world system. So he occupies a unique place in human history, not just one of many spiritual teachers. And the Buddha was an enlightened teacher. We can know him through practicing his teaching. He became a teacher of men and a teacher of gods. So we go for refuge to the Buddha and come to our second word. Our second word, saranam. So he's a Buddha, he's enlightened, but why go for refuge to him? Why refuge? The literal meaning, of course, of saranam is for refuge. Why not worship or respect? Why not be interested in him? Why for refuge in him? We can say that because his teaching leads us to safety, to a place of safety, more precisely, perhaps, a state of safety. Safety from the dangers of life, dangers that can harm us. Harm means we suffer. So refuge, meaning safety from suffering. But it's not that we escape difficulties. We'll all have them. The Buddha himself grew old. He died. But he didn't suffer because of it. He wasn't harmed. He wasn't in danger. And his teaching leads us to the same state, the state of security, a state that is a refuge, albeit difficult perhaps for us to imagine. And our third word, gacchami. So we have the Buddha. He is a refuge. His teaching is a refuge. So we go for refuge to him. Almost like we go to a place. Almost like we decide to travel somewhere. We have to make an effort to get there. Move our feet, buy tickets, and so on. The metaphor of travel works well in English. Gacchami can be literally translated by I go. In Russian, it's a bit more complicated. But anyway, in English, I go for refuge has much more of a sense of taking the initiative than just taking refuge. I go for refuge is more dynamic. So we have the meaning of Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. To the Buddha for refuge I go. This important line in the Refuges and Precepts. But if we look at the text of the Refuges and Precepts, we see not only Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, but Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, and even Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. So there are other refuges, other things to go for refuge to. We go for refuge to the Dhamma and to the Sangha. So what is the Dhamma? In Sanskrit, it's the Dharma. In Pali, it's the Dhamma. The Dhamma being the Buddhist teaching, of course, leading us to enlightenment. The path of practice leading to enlightenment. Preparing our consciousness to be able to take in absolute reality. Dhamma also means that reality itself. And Sangha being spiritual community, the spiritual community of those on the path. They might inspire and guide. There might be those that we can share our experience of the path with, who give and receive support, and with whom we can deepen our communication with, deepen our friendship with. So together, Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Together, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are known as Triratna. Triratna can be translated as three jewels. Just as jewels in ancient India were considered the most precious things of the material world, so for Buddhists, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are the most precious things of the material world. The three jewels are considered so important that we named our community after them. The Triratna Buddhist Community and the Triratna Buddhist Order. So, we go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, not only once, but a second time, when we say, Dutiyampi Buddhang, Saranang Gacchami, Dutiyampi Dharmang, Saranam Gacchami, and so on. And also a third time, we say, Tatiyampi Buddhang, Saranam Gacchami, into the Dharma, into the Sangha. In the time of the Buddha, in the Pali Canon, repeating something 3 times is quite common. It's a sign of determination, of intensity, of commitment. We'll look more at commitment later. But here we have a brief introduction to how we repeat the refuges, the 3 refuges 3 times in the Refuges and Precepts. But before the refuges, there are some other words. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddho. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddho. Namo tassa meaning homage to him. Who is he? The Buddha, of course. But several titles of the Buddha. Bhagavato, Arahato, Sama Sambuddho. Which can be beautifully translated as the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the perfectly enlightened one. So little more about him to whom we go for refuge at the beginning. And perhaps not surprisingly, we repeat these words 3 times as well. So, after the refuges, after firstly we've recognized the Buddha as such, then gone for refuge to him, what next? Well, it's the precepts, it's ethics. And why is this? To answer the question, let's look at a quotation from a book by Bhante Urgyen Sangharakshita. The book is on ethics. It's called The 10 Pillars of Buddhism. He says, going for refuge or commitment to the 3 jewels is one's lifeblood as a Buddhist. Observance of the precepts represents the circulation of that blood through every fiber of one's being. By its very nature, blood must circulate. If it does not circulate, this means that the organism to which it belongs is dead, and that blood itself, stagnating, will soon cease to be blood. Similarly, by its very nature, the going for refuge must find expression in the observance of the precepts. If it doesn't find such expression, this means that as a Buddhist, one is virtually dead, and that the going for refuge itself, becoming more and more mechanical, will soon cease to be effectively such. I won't say much about ethics since it was a theme of our last course. Only that after the Refuges and Precepts, we chant, after the Refuges, we chant the precepts in two ways. The first way, it's the precepts in negative form, that which we're not going to do, that which we're going to stop doing, or at least try to reduce doing. Usually they're chanted in Pali, and sometimes in our own language, in English. For now, I'll repeat them in English. I undertake to abstain from taking life. I undertake to abstain from taking the not given. I undertake to abstain from sexual misconduct. I undertake to abstain from false speech. And I undertake to abstain from taking intoxicants. The second way are the positive precepts, chanted in our own language. This is what we're going to do in a space opened up by what we're stopping doing. Bhante Sangharakshita considered it important to have a positive formulation of the ethical path. With deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body. With open-handed generosity, I purify my body. With stillness, simplicity, and contentment, I purify my body. With truthful communication, I purify my speech. And with mindfulness clear and radiant, I purify my mind. So after the refuges come the precepts in positive and negative forms. So we've looked at the meaning of going for refuge in the Refuges and Precepts, as well as the meaning of the Refuges and Precepts as a whole, in a certain amount of detail, as found in the Pali Canon. our oldest source of information about the historical Buddha himself. And in repeating the Refuges and Precepts, we've seen how people responded to the Buddha himself. At least we've seen the ritual expression, the ritual formulation of their responses. And it's the first step in understanding what going for refuge really is. But is it really enough to give us a feeling for going for refuge? To get a more dynamic sense of it, a more dynamic sense of going for refuge, let's look at a reading now from Bhante Sangharachita about going for refuge, about the experience of people meeting the Buddha, what we read, what we can find out by looking at a quotation from one of his talks on the subject. So, going for refuge. At the time of the Buddha, to quote Bhante Sangharachita, sometimes when reading the Buddhist scriptures, we get the impression that the Dharma is a matter of lists, but it certainly wasn't like that at the beginning. It was all fresh, all original, all creative. The Buddha would speak from the depths of his spiritual experience. He would expound the truth. He would show the way leading to enlightenment. And the person to whom he was speaking would be absolutely astounded and overwhelmed. In some cases, he might not be able to speak or do more than stammer a few incoherent words. Something had been revealed to him. Something had burst upon him that was above and beyond his ordinary understanding. For an instant at least, he had glimpsed the truth, and the experience had staggered him. Time and again, on occasions of this sort, the scriptures tell us that the person concerned exclaimed, "Excellent, Lord, excellent," as if one should set up again that which has been overthrown, or reveal that which has been hidden, or should disclose the road to someone who was astray, or should carry a lamp into darkness, saying that they who have eyes will see. Even so has the truth been manifested by the Exalted One in many ways. He or she would feel deeply affected, deeply moved, deeply stirred, and sometimes There are external manifestations of this. Their hair might stand on end. They might even shed tears. Or they might be seized by a violent fit of trembling. They would have a tremendous experience, an experience of illumination. They would have a tremendous sense of freedom, of emancipation, as though a great burden had been lifted from their back, or as though they'd been suddenly let out of prison, or as though they could at last see their way. The questioner, the listener, would feel spiritually reborn, would feel like a new man or woman. Then, out of the depths of their gratitude, such a person would fervently exclaim, Buddhang saranang gacchami, to the Buddha for refuge I go. Dhammang saranang gacchami, to the Dharma for refuge I go. Sanghang saranang gacchami, to the Sangha for refuge I go. So we can now see not only where the going for refuge had its origin, but also something of its tremendous spiritual significance. It is the heartfelt response of one's total being to the impact of the truth, the impact of reality. One commits oneself to the truth. One surrenders to the truth. One wants to devote one's whole life to the truth. The going for refuge represents our positive emotional reaction. In fact, our total response to the spiritual ideal when that ideal is revealed, our spiritual vision. Such is its appeal that we cannot but give ourselves to it. So, it's these sorts of experiences that can stand behind our going for refuge. They can support, motivate, give energy to our going for refuge. There are other kinds of experience that can support our going for refuge as well. We'll look at some of those later in the course. Plenty. Sangharakshita called them perfect vision experiences, not necessarily in front of a Buddha. Perfect vision being the first stage, the first limb of the Noble Eightfold Path. But maybe we have had such an experience where we felt astounded and overwhelmed, where our hair stood on end, where we shed tears, felt a tremendous sense of freedom, If we had had such experiences, then great. Our task is not to forget them, to make them stronger with our attention, to find ways to express such experiences in life, make them the basis of our actions and lifestyle. So they become stronger, so we become them. But what can we do if we haven't? We can give more attention to the three jewels. We can turn to the three jewels themselves. So, the Buddha. We can meet the Buddha by reading about him, reading about stories from his life, reading modern authors writing about him, and by looking at images of him, pictures and statues that give a sense of his qualities, his enlightened qualities, and by talking about him, our experiences and inspirations with other Buddhists, meeting the Dharma. It's worth not forgetting that shortly before the Buddhist parinirvana, he said, "He who sees the Dharma sees me. He who sees the Dharma sees me." So we can read the Dharma, discuss the Dharma, practice the Dharma, test the Dharma in the fires of our own experience, in the same way that goldsmith tests gold by fire. We can meet the Sangha, third of the three jewels, by communicating about the three jewels with people more experienced, and people on our own level of experience. People of our own nationality and of all nationalities, communicating about our direct experience, communicating about our practice, communicating about our inspiration. So in all these ways, we can deepen our experience of the three jewels, to let the fires of going for refuge burn, to give the three jewels a chance to more deeply affect us. So, before we begin to wind down, I'd like to ask you some questions for you to think about, and then give your thoughts, give your answers in our groups in WhatsApp or our groups in Telegram. First question. Have you ever had an experience of understanding something more deeply, that changed your way of seeing things, that allowed you to see things in a new way? If you have, can you tell us about it? Can you pinpoint exactly what changed? Secondly, about safety, about security. What gives you security? What are your sources of security? Why is security important even? Thirdly, deepening going for refuge. Are you inspired to try and deepen your going for refuge? What can you do to deepen your going for refuge? Who would you be? What kind of person would you be? How would you be different if you did deepen your going for refuge? And have you ever left anything because it felt false, untrue? A job, a relationship? How did you feel after you did it? Did you make a mistake? Or was it the right thing to do? And rituals. What's your experience of rituals? How does it sound even, the idea of doing rituals? Is it something you enjoy? Or does it make you feel suspicious? Feel free to say whatever you really think. And lastly, what is of most value to you? What is of most value? So in the next video, we'll see more about going for refuge and what not to go for refuge to, which is known as going forth. In the Buddhist time, he literally went forth from home into homelessness. So the two form a pair, going for refuge and going forth. But today, this video, we'll finish with a ritual. We'll finish by chanting the Refuges and Precepts to give another dimension of the experience of going for refuge. The relation between our practice and its expression in rituals, both individually and collectively, is something we'll look at in a future video. So now we can have the experience of doing a ritual together. We'll chant the Refuges and Precepts. As you've seen, they're mostly in Pali, so many strange words. Below the video, you can see links to the texts of the puja, to the text of the Refuges and Precepts, sorry, to help you pronounce the strange words, as well as the translation into your own language, into English. As a reminder, on top of what we've already seen in this video, so we'll recognize the Buddha as such. We'll express our going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and undertake to follow to the best of our ability the negative precepts, what we're trying not to do, and the positive precepts, what we are trying to do. Just to say how we do the puja, just to say, sorry, my slip again, how we do the refuges and precepts. The person leading will say the title, and then he'll say or she'll say one line and leave a space. And during that space, you can repeat the line. And then another line, another space for you. Or you can just sit and listen if you like. And we'll continue like that until the end. And just one final word before we start. The refuges and precepts will be most meaningful if our feeling of going for refuge is as strong as possible. And how can we intensify our feeling of going for refuge? Well, there are many ways to do this, but one thing that helps for a lot of people is we can chant the refuges and precepts before a small shrine. A shrine can be quite simple. A picture or a statue of a Buddha, surrounded by candles, incense and flowers. The incense can stand in a bowl, the flowers in a vase. Candles, incense and flowers, they're the three traditional offerings in Buddhism. A shrine can create an atmosphere of calm and beauty. We can sit before it for a few minutes, get in touch with ourselves, get in touch with the qualities of the Buddha and our own responses to those qualities, meaning our going for refuge to the Buddha, and then start the refuges and precepts. So I'll put a bolster behind my back, be upright and comfortable, as if I was meditating. And we can begin the refuges and precepts. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi, Dharmaṃ saranam gacchāmi, Sangham saranam gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranam gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dharmaṃ saranam gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchāmi. Satyampi Buddhang Saranam Gacchami. Satyampi Dharmang Saranam Gacchami. Satyampi Sanghang Saranam Gacchami. Panatipata Veramani Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami Adinadana Veramani Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami Kamesu Mechachara Veramani Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami Musavada Veramani Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami Suramerya Macha Amaditana Veramani Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu. With deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body. With open-handed generosity, I purify my body. With stillness, simplicity, and contentment, I purify my body. With truthful communication, I purify my speech. With mindfulness clear and radiant, I purify my mind. And one more word before we finish. What is enlightenment? That to which we go for refuge? Well, we've seen it's beyond words. But I would say as well, it's the essence, the purest extract of what I value the most. The essence, the purest extract of what I desire the most. The essence, the purest extract of what I love the most. In traditional Buddhist language, the wish-fulfilling jewel. That is a worthy object of refuge.